Welcome to another presentation of Curtis Jones writing. I'm on the next book, which is Getting There, and the subtitle is Choices Decide Destinations. So it's kind of a play on words. How we get where we are depends on what we do in life. And the first two stories I include in this book were family history stories. This is a little story I wrote for a contest and got honorable mention, but I didn't get into money with it. But I still think it's a pretty decent little story, and I think you might enjoy it. It's entitled Little Jet. So let's start with chapter 3 of Getting There. Building a flying machine. It was midsummer, and I had been out of school for 6 or maybe 8 weeks already. To keep my mind busy, I would build an airplane out of a discarded peach box. Most of you may not know what that is. It's a wooden box that's maybe about this long. It holds about a bushel of peaches in it, and they were all over California. But anyway, so now you know what a peach box is. We always had old peach boxes around after living in the Central Valley of California for several years. We were in Northern California now, where the hills were steep and high. They were always beautiful to look at. They reminded me of Oklahoma, where I came from. We were living in the coastal range at the north end of Ukiah, California. It was a beautiful place to live with the hills raising at about 30 degrees from just outside the backyard fence. The forest also started here. We had a rope hanging from an old oak tree about 150 yards up this hill. We swung from that old tree. We would end up maybe 15 foot off of the ground at the apex of the swing. The wind, pardon me, let me clear this. I was making coconut candy a while ago. I guess I got one stuck. The wind pulled back my sister's hair as it swept through and around our ears to make a blowing sound that made us giggle as we swung. We would fall from time to time, but we were usually close to the ground at the end of our half circle swing. When we hit the ground, we sounded like a wet blanket thrown from a second story window. We hit with a splat. It was very exciting. We all took turns on the swing as though we were trying to kill ourselves. We didn't know who put the rope in the tree. It had a 2x4 block of wood just long enough to sit on at the bottom of the rope. It was tied to the end of the rope, this block, and it made an uncomfortable but workable seat. We would pull it as far to the side as we could and then run down the hill with a rope between our legs until we came off of the ground. We would make a big circle around the front end of that tree until we came to the ground on the other side. At our age, we could see no danger in what we did. We had many hours of great fun on that hillside. It also took us out of mom's hair as well. So it was a win win for everybody. I became very acquainted with that hillside over that summer. I went there by myself sometimes, but that wasn't as much fun as being with my sisters. On this particular day, there was an eclipse of the moon. It was on the news the night before. It was to happen about 2 in the afternoon, but I didn't think about that as I started building my flying contraption. I turned the box upside down so I had a seat, and I attached two short 2x4s on the front at angles back toward the side like a fighter jet. I set an old throw pillow for my seat. I added two 1x12 slabs to form the tail, and I had my airplane. We had a hearty lunch of peanut butter and jelly on bread, one of my favorites at that time. After lunch, I went to the backyard and mounted my make believe jet fighter. My imagination soon took over, and I was in an aerial dogfight. I could see it all clear as day in my mind. I would dive to the left and climb to the right before I would do a wing over and catch my adversary in my sight and feel the victory. In a few minutes, I would catch another bandit, and soon I was an ace. I played most of the afternoon there. I suddenly found myself actually flying my little jet up the hill behind our house. It would go. It was like a movie, and I could feel it as I rose higher and cleared the back fence. This time, I was not controlling the craft. It had a mind of its own. I was just there for the ride. It turned left and followed the nap of the hill until it came to the ridge. We started up the crest of the ridge. I had a bicycle handlebar attached to the center of the wings, and I held on tightly. The craft rose slowly at first and then faster as we climbed the hill. I could feel the wind blowing through my hair now, just like the swing. At first, my jet avoided trees, but the faster I went, the less it avoided anything. Soon, I began to notice a cloud with lightning far ahead of me. The cloud stood vertical. It was not like other clouds. There was an orange glow that was very bright in this cloud. It was small at first, but grew as we moved faster until it was upon me. The cloud was about half transparent with a counterclockwise spin to it. The whole storm was maybe 50 foot across. I could see what looked like a very large magnifying glass at the center of the storm. I could have just been, it could have just been a bubble of water at the center. I couldn't tell. The thing on the other side of the bubble were the same as this side, just a little distorted. It was like looking through a glass that had a wave in it, but the waves were always moving like ripples on the surface of a lake. My jet was headed straight toward the center of the bubble with incredible speed. I'm sorry. I braced myself, expecting to be knocked off. Just as I reached the bubble, I closed my eyes for an instant. Then I passed through the center of the storm. I quickly opened my eyes and I had to suddenly catch my breath because I felt slightly a slight shock of electricity run through my body. There was also a sudden change in the temperature. I began to tingle all over as though my arms and legs had fallen asleep. The feeling ran over my whole body. It did not hurt, but it was so intense it made it hard to see clearly. My jet didn't slow any as I passed through the storm. My vision returned within a moment. There was a sense of strangeness to the air. My mountainside was unfamiliar now, as though I had never been here before. When all the strange feelings had passed, I began to notice that there were odd looking beings in the distance. They had bodies shaped like ours, but they were so different. I could see right through them. They were there and they were not there, like a ghost. I noticed that I was still climbing the hill. I was moving very fast by now. I was passing straight through everything that was in the way. I would close my eyes as we went through trees and buildings without feeling anything, but the transparent men I was seeing seemed to keep up with me while they didn't appear to be moving. They looked like they were standing still, in fact. I now began to look at them with more interest. What were they? What did they look? Why did they look so different? I looked at them and could tell they were made of light, as though they were holograms. I could see them and see through them at the same time. No person had ever heard of a hologram before this time, so I didn't know how to describe them until recently. Now, some of the beings were starting to disappear in the distance behind me. I had a chance to study them as they passed alongside me. They were colored like the bubbles my little sister used to blow with the wand that mom bought for her and a bottle of soapy water. They were mostly clear with a bright white undertone. As I looked at them, all the colors you could imagine appeared. The shimmering colors of the rainbow danced over their entire surface. I seemed to be in a trance as they caught my eye. Then, coming to myself, I noticed that they were trying to catch hold of me. That thought caused me great fear, and it rose within me. The fear made me more aware of what was happening around me. I also began to notice their shapes. Although they had heads and bodies and arms and legs, they were out of proportion to ours. Their arms were a lot longer than our arms, and their fingers were much longer, and they had two thumbs on each hand with only three fingers. Their legs were long and skinny, and their knees were large and round. I could see pinpoints of light moving around within their heads. Their eyes were brilliant green that shined brighter than the rest of their bodies. As each being grabbed for me, I would lean the other direction, just out of reach. I didn't know what they wanted with me. I thought these beings were big, perhaps 7 feet tall. But as I continued up the hill, flying faster and faster, the beings were getting bigger. Their reach was getting longer, too. The little jet was going so fast that the beings were all I could clearly see now. Everything else was just a blur of light passing by as mingled colors and smears of shapes. I wondered how long I would be able to avoid capture by these creatures. My fear subsided somewhat as I noticed the expression on their face went from determination to capture me to a kind of joy, like we were playing a game, like the whole thing was a game and they were winning. The beings were maybe 10 foot tall by this time. My jet slowed down. My view was much clearer now, too. Besides the strange creatures, I also began to see all kinds of woodland animals. There were squirrels and rabbits and birds of every kind. The animals also had a glow about them as well. The trees were hundreds of feet tall here. The trees had changed from brown trunks and green tops to purple trunks and red tops. The animals were the wrong color as well. In fact, the whole world looked different than it should. But somehow that seemed to be okay. I was comfortable with the look of where I was. In the sky, there was no sun, but a great orb that lit the whole world. It was almost transparent, too. It gave light to the whole world there. Soon my jet slowed to a stop, and wonderful, a wonderful calm came over me. There suddenly appeared before me 6 of the large creatures. When they reached out their great hands to me, I took hold of their fingers because I was not able to reach around their whole hand. As my hand touched theirs, I floated in the air. I was shoulder to shoulder with one of those hands I held, with the one whose hands I held. I realized we were at the top of the hill. I knew we were in a city, but it felt like a village. I looked over my own shoulder to make sure my little imaginary jet was still there as we moved away. I hoped it would still be there when I was ready to go home. We moved along a path that was beautiful, turquoise stones to guide us through the city. The buildings were made of what looked like pure silver. The houses were shining like they had just been buffed. There was a noisy stream that ran along one side of the path. The water was so clear that it was not visible to my eyes. I could hear it bubbling along nonetheless. I could feel the refreshing mist from it too. The village was calm and quiet, with the smell of flowers in bloom. I could hear the sweet song of birds in the distance and the chatter of squirrels playing. I floated along with these beings, and though and I thought how kind they were, or they seemed to be. We soon reached a golden castle. Though it was made of gold, it was as clear as crystal glass. I could see straight through it. As we drew near, a huge set of double doors swung open wide. I entered the great chamber, and 100 feet long. At the end was a great throne with one sitting upon it. He was grander than the castle, the chamber, or the throne. When he spoke, his voice was like honey dripping off of my tongue. It gave a feeling of peace and joy that I had never known. He told me, "Do you talk of what you have seen right now? I want you to know that we will see you here again one day, soon. Before you come here, tell others about this place. It will give them comfort." I knew at that moment that I had moved from the physical world into a spiritual world. It was more beautiful than the physical world, and it was kinder and gentler. I looked at my escort, and they smiled at me. They never said a word. I could feel that they loved me. They let go of my hand. I let go of their fingers. I turned and walked out of the grand hall. I went down the lovely path and soon came to my little jet. As soon as I sat upon it, I heard a thunderous noise and found myself in my backyard. It was almost dark. I ran to the kitchen and told my mother that I had been on a wonderful adventure. She said, "That's nice. Now wash your hands for dinner." I knew one day I would tell the story of that exotic adventure. I hope you enjoyed this story. It was it was one from my childhood, and I enjoyed it. Didn't have any place else to write it because it wasn't included in Dad's old truck series. But I hope you like it. If you like what I'm doing, you could go to my web page, which is curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com, and they have a link that can take you to Amazon where you could get this very book with that story in it. Uh, I also have a Facebook page, which is Curtis Jones Author Page, Facebook, and it has a link to take you to Amazon where you get these. You can get these books in paperback and in ebook, and some of my books come in hardback. I'm not really sure which ones. Love you. Take care until we meet again.